Welcome once again to Natural 2, our unscripted tabletop talk show, primarily about D&D. But
Especially
like,
about D&D.
yeah, especially about D&D. And this week, it's very special. It's a little different from what we've done so far. We're talking ripped from the headlines. We're talking 2-on-1. 1 D&D, that is.
Yes, 1 D&D is we've covered like theories and concepts and different things like that in D&D, but 1 D&D is the first like news that we're covering, and it has been a madhouse watching the community respond to this and Wizards of the Coast respond to it and all the different ideas, and just it's been rather fun. So we can go ahead and throw our two various opinions in the mix and watch them fight it out to the death. So
In a general sense, I'm excited. This
mhm.
has been a long time coming. Fifth edition has been the longest running edition of D&D,
Mhm.
and uh, I, I'm only human. I like the new hotness,
Mhm.
so it's an exciting time. Let the version wars begin anew.
Mhm. I will, I guess, like kick us off with the general, I guess, statement of there's so much like not personal attacks, but like emotional feelings getting in the mix of this, which I find somewhat strange. Like the Wizards of the Coast release a playtest for the community to playtest and comment on and feedback, and there's a survey coming, and everyone's like, "You can't complain about this. You don't even know what it is yet." It's like the whole point of this is to complain about it. Like, and this back and forth that is getting a bit more heated, where it really should just be like, "Ooh, something new. Let's discuss it. Let's talk about it. Let's analyze it and give our feedback." That is the point. So I will go ahead and put that out there that this is not some like takedown video or some, the other side is wrong. It is like, wow, there's a lot of shit in here, and some of it's cool and some of it's really dumb. So,
And I personally, I can't speak for you, of course, but I myself have thus far stuck to really just the official materials and announcements,
mhm,
because I wanted to go into our recording today kind of untainted
mhm,
by conspiracy theory or by my other like respected community luminaries' opinions on different aspects of what they've released. So
mhm.
I really just reviewed the official stuff. I've not looked at anybody else's hot takes. So
Yeah, I'm fully tainted, so we'll
yeah,
see how that comes together.
maybe we'll balance each other out.
hmm Okay, so the first thing that comes up when you read the Unearthed Arcana article, I think we're going to go ahead and leave the announcement trailer and the interview at large for later in the video or in the discussion, and just first go over what was released to the public and what we're supposed to be talking about as a community. And the first section of the Unearthed Arcana article, which is character creation, is races. And we get like little brief descriptions of them. We get the traits and the aspects and like the size and speed and all the different special attributes and things of that nature. There's the new Ardling race as well. The overall statement I would make about the races in general, and I'm sure we'll kind of maybe go down and break through a couple of them, is I am somewhat disappointed to see the races becoming more and more singular mass, right? Not in the sense that they can't be physically discerned from each other, right? Like the Ardlings are these bird people, or these, I guess, all sorts of animal people, and the Tieflings are still these somewhat other plane, somewhat demonic entities, but that's also kind of changing. There are no negatives or positives that are impactful enough that they would come up in the game or have a mechanical meaning. The analogy I would make is when you think of Skyrim, everybody has played Skyrim. I am guaranteed. Once you select your character race and you get whatever small racial ability that you have, that little special thing you can pop every so often, your character's race does not matter at all. This like core defining thing of your character in an RPG game just becomes nothing. You put a helmet on, you're in first person, literally could be a Nord, Imperial, or Khajiit, doesn't matter. I'm feeling a little bit of that with some of the changes they were making to the races, because this somewhat leans into the interviews that we've heard or listened to, where Jeremy Crawford describes the new dwarf as the dwarfiest dwarf, but then almost like a few minutes later describes a dwarf can be anything they want. They're no longer constrained by being miners in the depths, but all of their abilities are based around that. And I feel like these two ideas of each race should just be a blank slate and each race needs to be different are really clashing with this playtest, or at least what they've given us so far. And it doesn't sit well with me. It doesn't make me feel excited. I think it might be a somewhat rough direction they're taking, but that's my general vibe of the different race things that we got.
This is the one thing in the materials they've released thus far that I feel like is actually in response to something from the community.
Mm-hmm.
That when we talk about the rest of the stuff that's in the playtest material, I don't know who it's for. I don't know where it comes from. But this is the one thing that I do sort of have a sense of who it's for. Whom it's for. Because I've seen a lot of discussion over the years where folks are they're making connections or they're drawing parallels with D&D race and the more problematic or troubled aspects of ethnicity in our real world and our real lives. And I'm not interested in talking about that specifically in the context of our video, except to say that this obviously seems to me like an attempt to address those concerns,
Mm-hmm.
um, and to make that statement of inclusivity, underline, bold, exclamation point.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I don't from a mechanical standpoint or in the context of the game, it doesn't bother me really. Um, I can sort of appreciate the modular approach that they seem to be taking, where it's Build-A-Bear, but or Mr. Potato Head, but it's a D&D race.
Mm-hmm.
Slot in the parts that interest you, and I think that I'm um, leaning toward pro or leaning toward positive on it, just because I know for myself that I, uh, as much as I think of myself as a role player a lot of the time, there are ancestry options that I've not once considered because in the past they had uh, penalties that that I was not interested in trying to work around, or that did not suit any character concept
Mm-hmm.
that I was interested in playing. So go ahead.
Yeah, let me put forth the reason that I think this is ultimately a bad thing. Right, I'm not saying that they're barreling down the path and this is the end of the world, but where I could see this potentially going. Again, using Skyrim as a very good example. Bethesda wanted all of their content to be accessible to every player at any point, right? They don't want to put roadblocks in their way because this person is playing the main character in a video game and they want to have them experience everything. The best example of this kind of like strange disconnect going on is the Nords in Skyrim are horribly racist towards dark elves to the point where they like throw them in the slums, they don't let them come into their city. There's this whole issue. But if you play a dark elf, it doesn't come up. It's not a big deal. It's just, oh, whatever, it's fine. You're the cool one. We hate all of them, but not you, buddy. And I think so. The example I would use for the playtest is they've now just made like straight orcs a playable race, which I'm imagining people have been doing forever. People play half orcs all the time, and that isn't the end of the world, right? Like everyone can do whatever they want at their home games, but when you're putting something in a rule book or you are defining something for your game, it's different because you're kind of leading players in a certain direction. Orcs have been traditionally the bad guys. evil, right? In the D&D lore, except I think they might be changing it because of what we've been seeing. They're built from evil gods. They serve an evil god. There's no like gray there. He is evil. He wants to encapsulate the world in this orc fury, right? Like, and that's been the black and white. In the playtest, they're still serving this god. He still goes by the same name. They just don't define him as evil in the description, but they still want to go and make this god happy. They want to do his bidding. They want to make him proud. And so it's weird to me that they're just like, yeah, here's an evil person you can play, but now it makes the whole question of like, should we be killing orcs? I mean, can they be redeemed? We have a player who's now redeemed. Should we redeem all of them? And it's strange. So I would ask what your kind of general, I guess, thoughts are on that, because to me it felt weird.
I do think that in this first packet, they are sort of trying to serve two masters, and also in the interview that you mentioned, that it's kind of the same thing. They're talking out of both sides of their mouths. Um, and if it were me, I think that I would completely divest the two. Like I would make, if I'm writing the new player's handbook, there is almost nothing that goes into the character creation chapter about the cultures of these races.
Mm-hmm.
Have a separate chapter that talks about orcs in general,
Mm-hmm.
if you even want to do that at all. The games that I primarily have played take place in homebrew original settings where anything can be anything, and we
Mm-hmm.
don't even use most of what is in the books about the cultures
Mm-hmm.
and how they are. So instead of bending over backwards to include like, this is what orcs are like, but you don't have to be that way. Your orc can be anything you want, but the other orcs are like this. Take that stuff and put it in a whole other part of the book, or in a whole other book.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't need to be there, and muddle your messaging about how your guy can be whatever you want, but the other guys are like this.
Yeah, I think if you want to make an evil race, that's totally valid. And I think, I don't know if we've mentioned this yet, in our world and in fantasy worlds, races don't have the same meaning as races to us as human beings on Earth, right? Everyone is human, but in a fantasy world, not everyone is human. They come from different places, they're built by different gods, they are literally completely different entities. You can have an evil race, and that's totally cool. And you can have an evil race and then have one of the people break free and be like almost the Driz kind of archetype, right? Like he comes from an evil race, but he eventually ends up being somewhat of a heroic character. But when you are making a rule book, when you are introducing a new player to the game, and you are, kind of having that guiding hand, remove that if that is what you want to do, right? If you want to have an evil race, leave it unaccessible to players, and then add it in some sort of addition or some sort of addendum. I can't speak today. Addendum, right? That's the term.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you want everything to be gray and every race to be somewhat mixed, then build it into the culture. Say these orcs are great because they were farmers and they're peaceful and they live in harmony with everybody else. These orcs are evil because they're raised by this person or influenced by this thing, and remove it from the race. I think that is the two things, right? Like either have the evil race and commit, or do not include it in the race so that you can then diversify and do the inclusive sweep that they're trying to do, as I think the kind of side that I'm trying to express is.
There, some of the stuff belongs in a setting book,
Yeah.
not in the player's handbook.
Mhm.
Uh, I, I, I'm not certain that there needs to be mention of any deities at all in the player's handbook. Just a paragraph about, or like in the back of the current player's handbook, the 2014 player's handbook, they just have lists
Mhm.
of potential deities from different settings.
Yeah, even real life like pantheons and stuff to pull from, and
Yeah, from
yeah.
ancient ones and
Mhm.
what have you. Well, I don't need to repeat myself. It can
Mhm.
be a little confusing, or it can be a little bit like, which direction are we going here? Um, and yeah, it kind of seems like they're at this early stage, and it is, we should. Do we have to have this disclaimer? Like, it's all playtest material. It's all subject to change. That's one of the things that sort of amuses me about how angry people are right now.
Mhm.
I am also an avid video game nerd from all the way back to early childhood. So I'm very familiar with the concept of the makers of a game giving a bunch of interviews and talking about how things are going to be in the game when it's finished. And then you get it, and it's like, where is 80% of this stuff that I was excited about or angry
Mhm.
about from these interviews 5 years ago? It's
Mhm.
gone. Guess what? Things change. So I don't think there's anything to be angry about yet, per se, uh, because it is all play testing, it is all early stages. A lot of this stuff will be missing completely when the book comes out, and there will be other
Mhm.
things that uh, we never even saw in the play tests that's now in the book, and it's like, what the hell?
Well, I'll throw you another little food for thought here then. Human beings able to be small, but dwarves, no. I find that odd. I find that very odd choice. And the reason I do is I think the understanding of when a race is described in the player's handbook is this is the average of this race, right? They are describing the vast majority, the middle ground. We're not going into the extremes because then it would take 7 years to describe all the different small variations that these races could be. Humans are not usually 2 or 3 feet tall. I'm sure in a homebrew setting or whatever you want to do, you can make that happen, and that's fine. But like the average human being is not as small as a hobbit, is not as small as a dwarf. And it's weird to me that they went out of their way to be like, there are humans that are 2 feet, just so you know. And I'm like, I was very aware of that. There are also humans that are like 8 feet. And like, I found that really weird that they included that because it just felt like pointless or like, I don't even know what it came from.
I there again, I feel like I have a sense of where it came from, and as the one and only ancestry in the book that also exists in our real world, I can understand the impulse to be, again, just inclusive, I guess, is
Mm-hmm.
is the word. And I think that having it in the book, like, we know that in our group we don't have a problem with saying, hey, I want to play a human, but he's 3 feet tall.
Yeah.
How do we make this work?
Yeah. Totally
Yeah,
fine. Yeah.
and we're fine with that. And I think that not every group or the Adventurers League or what have you is fine with that. And so putting it in the book makes it literally official. So now people have access to it potentially at
Mm-hmm.
any average table.
Yeah.
Um, there again, I wonder if it wouldn't just be better to have a paragraph at the end of the character creation section, or in a, what do they call those? What do they call the text box that's a different color and it's sort of a standout?
Appendices, right? Or no,
Um,
that's no, that's the end of the book.
this is like an insert that is, it's almost like a parenthetical,
Yeah.
but it's a whole section of the page.
Yeah.
Put it in the comments if you know what I'm talking about. They could have had one of those that just talked about how to handle outliers or exceptional character types in a way that is friendly to the game.
Mm-hmm.
Because I do see what you're saying. Like, if humans can be small or medium, can there not be one that's large?
Yeah. Well, why
Can
can't
there
every
not be a
race have
dwarf
that?
that's small? Can
Yeah.
there not be a dwarf that's uh just an exceptionally tall dwarf like that?
Mm-hmm.
It does kind of open the floodgates for, especially if you've got people at your table who enjoy needling or enjoy like poking at the weak spots,
Mm-hmm.
to a lot of, I guess, arguing
Mm-hmm.
about what does and doesn't fit or what isn't appropriate. It's sort of like in in creating this option or in highlighting this option for the human ancestry. Now it's almost making it seem like something is missing from all the others when we otherwise wouldn't have even thought about it. I don't know.
So
It's
this,
tough.
yeah.
It's tough because there's a lot of like I don't want to enter into any discussion in a public space such as this video
Hmm.
without making it clear that my feelings about races in fictional settings are on an island
Hmm.
as much as possible.
Hmm.
My thoughts about real world issues are complex and they're always changing and I'm always trying to get a better understanding, and nothing that I've ever done in D&D or said in D&D has ever been meant or has ever had connection back to some secret feeling that I have about a real life issue.
Hmm.
Um, Sort of compelled to make that clear. Um, as well as I think that people should be able, if you want to play a
Hmm.
6 foot dwarf or a 2 foot human or what have you, then you should be able to work with your DM and make that a possibility.
So I'm
Uh,
going to attempt real quick to try and cap this to the best of my ability and see if you agree with me, sir. My general feeling is that Wizards of the Coast, I did not say that right, but that's fine, are having an issue figuring out what their job is. And I feel like they are responding to the community in strange ways because they're trying to appease a bunch of different approaches when it really should just be here's the rules, here's the races and the options and the classes, and then allow people to mold that on the kind of fringe things, like the things that they don't need to include because they are rather extreme. There is the other side of that coin where they're getting so loose with some of the rules that it opens up all these other questions and all these other avenues and makes it almost feel like they're being lazy because they say, yeah, this is what you should do, but just do whatever you want at your table. And that has another small problem. And I think they are straying from that kind of middle ground that we've been, I guess, enjoying for a little bit, where they list what their rulebook is, what their, the stats and the races and the different things, and then at the end of everything says, feel free to change this. Play whatever game you want, but here's the game that we've built. Where now they're like, here's something, but if you don't want to take it or leave it, or here's another thing, and like it's now you can do this with that if you want. Like here's everything that you can do, and it doesn't feel precise. It doesn't feel clean. It doesn't feel finished. Is kind of a some term that I've heard being thrown around. And so like it doesn't like our opinions on the races and like how they correlate with real life issues or don't correlate with real life issues is not the thing here. It is the game is becoming almost kind of confusing or strange or undefined because of this kind of weird approach they're taking. And that's kind of where like all this stuff almost kind of connects. That was a little bit rambly, but that was my best attempt.
I think we can pretty well move on.
Hmm.
We've said what I think we have to say about it at this point.
Hmm.
It's it's more modular, but it's not as modular as it could be or as they want to act like it is.
Hmm.
And it's got a ways to go.
Yeah.
But in general, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
why not?
Yeah. Nothing's offensive, but nothing is exciting is probably how I would describe it in the smallest of ways.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Before we leave races behind, there is one more thing that I've got. What are the Ardlings from? Who are Ardlings for?
Oh, you mean like as a community or as like lore?
Either any? Like it's sort of this weird mashup of the beast ancestries and ASMRs
Hmm.
in the blurb that they have in the playtest material, and it just seems kind of random. Like what?
Yeah, yeah. What it feels like is we already know players are taking tabaxis and then just playing like cat girls. So let's just give them cat girls. Like that's kind of like the what I was feeling when they announced it because it is weird.
Yeah, that one's out of left field for me. I couldn't figure out the inspiration or the impetus behind it at all.
Mhm.
Just I mean, I guess it sounds okay, but it also sounds a lot like stuff that we already had. And it makes
Um,
me wonder are where are the Azamars? Why are they not again for the second book in a row, not just in the player's handbook? What what?
I'm a little, very slim concerned that they are including a race with flying in the player's handbook or attempting to with this playtest. Like, not the end of the world, but it's if this is the first time a group is sitting down to play the game and you're just using the core rulebooks to make it happen to be introduced, a lot of adventures and like traps and like situations and like threats are quickly eliminated by being able to fly. And it is limited, but it is still flying. And it's something that like the other players will just not have access to. And it's a little
It's it's more like a rocket jump
yeah.
in the way that it works mechanically, but I agree. Flight is very powerful in the game,
Hmm.
and it is the races that in 5e already that have flight from the beginning are commonly restricted or banned outright
Hmm.
because it's a milestone, it's a turning point when the party gets access to flight, no matter how many members of the party it is, because of the new literally the new dimension that it adds that DMs have to consider now, because
Hmm.
stuff that would have been a challenging adventure before now is yeah, I fly up there and then I tie the rope off and everybody else can climb up. The end.
Hmm.
So that yeah, we'll see if that makes it through the playtest.
I want to slip in here real quick that the way that I've kind of been criticizing this, and I think that the way that most people should at least think about is how is this going to play out when someone new to the hobby gets these books, right? It's 2026, 1D&D is released. Some 14-year-old kid goes to a hobby shop, picks up the core rule books, and is sitting down to play 1D&D first time. That is the person that I want to be addressed with these things, right? Us that are old to the hobby, that have been playing it forever, or are very familiar with it, we can do whatever we want. We could make our own game system if we really wanted to. We already know we're here. We already know the field. We're just picking things like little buzzards. The new people need an introduction, a proper introduction with rules and guidelines and a reasonable amount of things to deal with, right? So if you are having a bunch of new players sit down and one of them picks Ardling and this DM is new, he's going to struggle to include that without it being like too bright and running over the other players or flying over the other players. Um, I think that is where my concern comes from. Not that like, oh, I don't want anybody flying. That's ridiculous. Get this hogwash out of here. It's more like the core rulebook should be approachable, and the more like crazy stuff you throw in there that people aren't ready for might be a problem. So, was that it on races, sir?
Yeah, back to what you were saying.
Back to backgrounds. Yes, it's really interesting timing because me and another player in our group are focusing on trying to come up with a cooler background system for D&D because the backgrounds in 5e are just boring and bland. And again, kind of like what I was talking about earlier, once you pick at a character creation, doesn't matter. Like it does not come up in a significant way down the road. So having a background that affects your stats and is a bit more involved and takes the player's mind and goes, what did this look like, is cool. I don't think it's perfect. I think there's more you could do with it, but I am so appreciative that that is something they're focusing on because it's been kind of like background stuff for so long, and I'm very excited about that.
I took it as an expansion on or a further evolution on what they already had been doing with backgrounds in some of the expansion books that they've released for 5e,
Hmm.
or some of the character option rules that they have added in those books. It seems like a pretty natural progression, and I backgrounds were always meant to be build your own, but the
Hmm.
way that it was presented in that 2014 player's handbook sort of glossed over that, and everybody just picked out of the list of examples that were given. Uh, and I like that they are highlighting that more in this material and saying, no, really, you're supposed to make your own.
Hmm.
And these are just examples of what it looks like when you're done.
Hmm.
So I'm a
Yeah.
fan.
I think it's a crafty way of taking players that focus way more on mechanics and being powerful and what their character can do and kind of teasing them or luring them into thinking about their character as a person because they're like, here's little attribute points that you can put wherever you want, but you can't put them until you tell me where and how. Like, I think that's cool. Like, I think that was a very, uh, I don't know, decent thing to do, a thing that is going to benefit the game as a whole, and just adds to what we already had. So, thumbs up in my book. Leveled feats. You got an opinion?
Leveled feats or the level 1 feats?
It sounds like they are going to have leveled feats.
So this is where things get a little weird, talking about the playtest material and what they've officially announced versus what people are trying to parse out of it.
Mm-hmm.
They call them level 1 feats, which does suggest that there are level 2 feats or level
Mm-hmm.
10 feats or what have you. But they also have in a lot of those feats language whether or not it is repeatable.
Mm-hmm.
So you can't only take them at level 1 or else there's no purpose for that language. I'm not sure what to make of that. It's interesting that they are choosing to make feats a part of the core rules and not an optional rule.
Mm-hmm.
Technically in 5e, feats are optional, but it's an option that basically everybody chooses. Even tables that I have watched, professional D&D players and dungeon masters who say that they don't let their players use feats, it's because they give them out as rewards in the game. So they're
Mm-hmm.
still using feats. They've just changed, you know, how they can be applied.
Mm-hmm.
So it's interesting that they're going back to making them part of the core rules and they're not really optional anymore. I am the only thing I'm concerned about is how it may contribute to. I don't really care about balance. I think that worrying too much about balance in D&D is a trap.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think that power creep is potentially a problem. And what it looks like in their playtest material is that instead of making the feats part of character creation modularity, the races have at least as much ability as they did in 5e, plus they all get to pick a feat like the variant human does in 5e. And feats are, well, they're potentially game changing. Look at Sentinel. Like Sentinel is not in the list of their playtest feats,
Mm-hmm.
but uh it isn't hard to imagine taking one of those feats and really doing a lot of damage, let's say, in one way or another to your campaign.
I have a sneaking suspicion that they are trying to make the characters at level 1 more varied because it's almost kind of a community accepted standard that if I'm building a character, he's coming in at level 3 because I need my subclass to be unique. Like that is something that I think is pretty agreed upon across the community. And so I think what they're trying to do with backgrounds and feats is kind of giving you a soft subclass, allowing you to come in as a rogue, but an entirely different type of rogue than your friend's rogue at level 1, where previously it's a lot more difficult to separate those two. Now you could be a different race with different racial abilities. You can have a different background with different attribute bonuses and a different feat. And you can come in as a different character mechanically. I think that's where this is coming from. And I don't think that's bad, but it could have some consequences.
That's a good point, and it actually makes me warm up to the idea. I I do. You're right that it's sort of the accepted standard that the only time you start at level 1 is when you're a new player playing your first game, and that every
Mm-hmm.
game after that starts at level 3 or level
Mm-hmm.
5 or something like that. So if they're giving us a reason to start more campaigns at the very beginning, that's cool potentially. It just makes me wonder if some of those later levels are going to get watered down compared to 5e
Mm-hmm.
as a way to compensate for how front loaded a new character is.
Yeah, I think that's something that we're only going to be able to see once we have basically the entire rule book or what their objective is. I will, going off the Sentinel thing you mentioned, that would be my argument for leveled feats. I don't hate Sentinel, but I hate how easy Sentinel is. As like if you do the variant human rule, and of course this is all under the conditions that you allow this, but I think most tables would. I'm a human, variant human, take my feet, I got Sentinel. You are objectively way more powerful than you should be at level 1. You can stop dragons in their tracks. You could stop, whole armies potentially given the right conditions. Like this is a very, very powerful feat to hand out. And so having the ability for them to go, you got to be at least this tall to ride this ride, bucko, I'm not opposed to. And then again, it's one of those things where if it doesn't fit your table, I imagine most people will just take the levels off of it. And all right.
Yeah, that's there's a lot of, even in this first packet, there's a lot of stuff that I can already see is going to get house ruled to death.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but we'll get to that.
Yeah. I think that's about all I got for feats and backgrounds. We can get into some of the actual rules that are interesting.
That'll be our segue then. The
Yeah.
the rules, which I also think are probably the most controversial, the
Mm-hmm.
suggested rules changes.
I'll throw out this little conspiracy theory because I found it entertaining. A lot of people are saying that these rules are being put in here purely to be controversial, so people will play test the material or talk about it or look into it, knowing that they're just going to take it out. And that's not impossible. I could certainly see that being a thing. But let's talk about the Nat 1 and Nat 20 rule. Being the untainted of the two of us, what are your thoughts?
So I I don't like it. I'm not a fan. Um, I I don't think that I. First of all, I definitely don't like 20s and ones being automatic successes and failures in skill checks
Mm-hmm.
and saving throws. I think that your proficiency in a skill is already it's already unfocused
Mm-hmm.
when you are proficient in a skill versus a member of your party that isn't. There's already not enough differentiation there for me. And this waters that down even more, where you've got a situation where the rogue who has taken expertise, he's double proficient in perception or stealth, let's say, that's an even better example, uh has a bad roll, but because of a fluke of the dice, the fighter in heavy armor standing next to him got a nat 20 on his stealth check
Mm-hmm.
and is instant success. He's more stealthy than the rogue who has invested in the skill. No, 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 no. I think enough is left up to the dice already that I don't like this. I had to learn to be okay with it in combat with critical hits and critical misses. But extrapolating it out to all rolls of a d20, no. I'm not in favor of it. If I'm DMing, this is one of the first things that I house rule out
Mm-hmm.
because I want it to matter if you have invested in a skill. And this is de-emphasizing your investment even more, and that's already like they're going in the wrong direction for me here. They need
Mm-hmm.
to be playtesting rules that make it matter more if you're proficient,
Mm-hmm.
not less.
I fully agree with that sentiment. Um, Skills in D&D 5e feel so gray because you can get assistance by basically anybody. And I know the rules say that they have to reasonably be able to assist, but you're just going to get in this horrible argument with your players when you go, I don't think this guy can help barter. It's like, why not? I can speak. And it's like, one of you has mastery and persuasion, and one of you has a -3. There's a reason these skills exist, and the fact that like the party so often kind of like group tank and like I guess like cannonball these skills through
Dog
without
pile, skill dog
yeah,
pile.
like so yeah, I think this only emphasizes that issue where anybody like, the scenario that I see playing out in my head, a thief is trying to lock pick a box, right? And oh, I can't get it. It's like I like, throws his things down, his tools are broken or whatever. And then the freaking like, the stereotypical barbarian that fixes everything with a club goes, "Well, I'll try. I have a 5% chance." And that is where the debate comes in of don't let him roll for it. And it's like, all right, I can agree with that, but the way that I so often ask for skill checks is not let's see if you succeed, let's see if you beat my DC. It's let me see what I can give you, right? I much prefer kind of like dynamic or softer DCs where if you meet it, you meet it and you're good, and there's certain implications to that. If you destroy it, I am more than willing to make that happen, right? And so to take away that tool as a DM of asking for a roll and now having that like bludgeon that the players can wield of I got a natural 20, I gotta succeed is painful. The alternative that I wish they would have put in is a natural 20 is automatically the best to your ability or the best situation possible, not success. I think that singular word is the problem, where if that was gone, I could roll with best outcome possible, even if you're not proficient with the skill, because I can describe that. You can make a narrative around that. But just hammer fisting dice to try and get a nat 20 to progress doesn't sound right to me.
I also don't like the implications of the automatic failure
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
because a rogue with double proficiency in stealth,
Mm-hmm.
that takes me out of the game. The idea that this person who is an,
A
a
master.
master, they are a master of stealth.
Have like plus 13 or some shit.
Yeah, that they have a 5% chance to fall flat on their face.
Mm-hmm.
5% is huge.
Mm-hmm.
5% is more than you think it is. It comes
Yeah.
up more often than you think it does. And
Mm-hmm.
so for someone who is a world-class master of a
Mm-hmm.
skill, I think that it should go the other way, and that you should be rewarded again for investing so heavily in that skill that even on a 1, the tasks that are trivially difficult are still trivial for you. You
Mm-hmm.
can there are things where if the DC is not above a 15, you don't even have to roll because you're just that good. You
Mm-hmm.
should be rewarded for building your character in that way. And I really hate what the natural 1 failure does to that. It's
Mm-hmm.
like if you were watching the Olympics and there was always a 5% chance that the pole vaulter was just going to smack into the pole
Mhm.
and look like a doofus. That would be funny for 30 minutes, and then it would
Mhm.
be like, why am I watching this?
Could
These
you
people are
imagine a
cool.
bunch of racers lined up and like, the pistol goes off and 5% of them just fall on their faces?
Right, and that's what we're
Yeah.
talking about here in my mind.
Yeah.
So no,
Mhm.
absolutely not.
Mhm.
Uh, I might go so far as to say that I will never accept it. If it makes it into the new rule book, no game that I run is going to use it. It will
Mhm.
be house ruled out every single time. And I'm not even a big house rules guy. Like I am
Mhm.
always very skeptical of homebrew because my uh, philosophy is taste the original recipe first
Mhm.
and it, at least give it a try.
Mhm.
Because at the end of the day, you assume that these are professionals that worked on this, so they must know something of what they're talking about. But
Mhm.
this rule would not survive my table.
Yeah, my adjustment would be best case scenario for the nat 20 and worst case scenario for the nat 1, with the implication that if your bonus pushes that higher than it needs to be, the worst case scenario is a master looking somewhat mediocre. That's his worst case scenario, right? He's not
Yeah.
going to die because he forgot something that he would not forget anyway. I think that
The
pretty
pole
much, yeah,
vaulter, the pole vaulter
yeah.
clipped the pole with 2 millimeters of their right butt cheek, and they didn't get a perfect 10.
Yeah.
Not their pole broke and went up their ass, and now
Hmm.
they're in the hospital.
Hmm.
Like, come on, come on.
Hmm. So I think that is by far the most controversial. And I would most certainly give some weight to the, I think they just threw this in here so people will talk. I think there's some truth to that. I really don't think this is going to end up in the core rules because I think it's just way too out there.
Let's hope.
Yeah.
Frankly, let's
No.
hope. And
Hmm.
is now the appropriate time to talk about what they've proposed about critical hits?
Yeah. Yeah.
So again, we're doing a little bit of extrapolation based on my awareness of what they've released, a little bit of extrapolation based on the language of this playtest packet.
Hmm.
But it seems to suggest that only melee or no, only weapon attacks
And
or
unarmed?
unarmed
Yeah.
strikes by player characters
Hmm.
can critically hit.
Hmm.
So this leaves out all NPCs,
Hmm.
which means that not only does no character that the DM controls ever critically hit, but also none of your NPC allies ever critically hit either,
Hmm.
which as a person who loves sidekick characters bums me out. And that no spells critically hit either.
Hmm.
That's the other thing in this that is potentially huge. A big, big change that I also personally don't think I'm in favor of. And I don't understand who it's for. I don't know whose concerns they are addressing by making that change.
With the new rules, does Smite no longer double their damage on a crit?
I think that again, we're talking about playtest stuff that we've had a matter of days to look
Hmm.
at. Based on the language, I think Smite still crits because it's not a spell. It's adding radiant damage dice to the
You
attack.
so this is the exact wording because I have it pulled up. You roll the damage dice of the weapon or unarmed strike. I could certainly see people reading that and going the weapon damage and not the effect damage or this like added class feature. It very clearly, capital weapon, not, another word. Like, it doesn't say damage. It says damage of the weapon or unarmed strike.
There again, that's something that you have to think
Hmm.
like this is a playtest packet. It did not get the same level of revision
Hmm.
that the actual book would have, but there's a lot to be concerned about there. There's now only these it begs the question why even have critical hits
I wonder if
because of
that
the
also applies to the sneak attack damage, because that would make every rogue in the universe roll over in their grave.
This is another change that I don't know how it survives the playtest, and
Mm-hmm.
even if it does, I don't know how it survives most people's tables
Mm-hmm.
because it's so underwhelming. Like, again, why even have crits at all?
Mm-hmm.
If that's what you're doing to it, just take them out. And if your purpose in taking them away from NPCs is to streamline the game, again, just take them out altogether.
Mm-hmm.
What is the point? Because if now a critical hit just means, well, you definitely hit and you get to add one more d6.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I mean, I guess that's nice. Sometimes the bad guy will have exactly 6 hit points left, and that might be good. But how deflating. And also for the DM, like there are situations where that bad guy critically hitting was a pivotal moment, and it made everybody at the table sit up and take notice and
Mm-hmm.
change the tone, and you're gonna lose all of that.
Some of the arguments I've been hearing is that this is supposed to help close the gap between marshals and casters. I think that's absolutely absurd. If that was the reason behind it, there's a much better way of approaching that than nerfing the critical hits of spells, because that's such a small amount of that perceived gap. But to touch on DMs no longer critting, some DMs instantly threw up posts of, "Oh, you shouldn't be like excited about your crits. You should only be excited for your players' crits." And I appreciate that tone, and I don't disagree with it. But I am much more of the opinion that everyone should be excited about what is going on in the game, what the rules and the chaos and the dice bring to the story, because that's why we play D&D versus just sitting around talking about these fictional characters without any sort of rules. If you take away the random chance of a creature just coming out balls to the wall, you're limiting that randomness, that energy, that excitement, the unknown, right? Like, you are now very clearly pushing it more towards the creature is going to come up and he's going to deal X amount of damage so that he doesn't kill the party outright or, take out more than half their HP in a single attack. And it's like, why take that away? Like, I know, like, you don't want that happening every round. You don't want that happening every combat. But that's why there's a 5% chance. Like that,
It
that's
already won't happen
yeah,
every
yeah.
round or every combat. In some cases, it may not happen the whole session.
Mm-hmm.
I have definitely played entire game nights where
Mm-hmm.
nobody critted anything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
the idea that you're also going to rely on this to close the gap between martials and magic users also seems silly because you're talking about random chance. So now
Mm-hmm.
you're counting on the person playing a martial to also roll crits
Mm-hmm.
as a way to make them feel better about playing a martial. That's
Mm-hmm.
very loosey goosey, and I don't, that doesn't seem like good design to me. I'm
Mm-hmm.
not a professional game designer, but as a person who's been playing for a heck of a long time, that doesn't feel good. That wouldn't make
Mm-hmm.
me think like, oh, well, I'm glad I'm playing a martial. And I also think that fifth edition has made that gap the smallest that it's been in 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
I think that the gap, the gap so called between marshals and casters can be more easily overcome through smart play
Mm-hmm.
or informed play. And if you find at your table that there's a huge gap between marshals and casters, maybe your DM needs to learn how to deal with casters. Maybe they just don't understand how to handle magic
Mm-hmm.
users.
Or
Uh,
you're not doing it right. There's a lot of tables who honestly misunderstand spellcasting.
yeah. So I think that they would do better to include a whole chapter in the new Dungeon Master's Guide of how to challenge different kinds of characters as the
Mm-hmm.
DM, and suggestions for, hey, if you've got a caster that just is tearing things up all the time, here are the weaknesses you can exploit, or here are the kinds of bad guys you can bring to make things interesting again.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Again, just this idea of yanking critical hits out of 3/4 of the game. I don't get it. I don't know who that's for. I don't know what it's supposed to improve. It feels bad.
I'll keep this incredibly brief because it is a little bit outside the scope of this conversation. But if that was the goal, I think a much more interesting way or more direct way of approaching this is instead of taking away crits from casters, implement the rule that if a melee weapon or martial individual strikes 10 above their AC, give them a crit. Give marshals more crits because they're in there fighting and in the midst of things. Don't take away spellcasters crits. Rather, give marshals something cool and interesting and unique instead of eliminating other things that are already very well established. So,
Put it in a feat.
yeah,
If
yeah.
you critically hit, if you critically hit with a melee weapon, it does this additional damage or these
hmm
additional effects. And
hmm
one of the prerequisites is proficiency with martial weapons.
There you go. There you
Done.
go.
You're welcome. You can have that one.
uh-huh. So, okay, that kind of brings me to the end of all the shit I want to talk about with the article. Is there anything else that you had?
Just to reiterate, don't panic.
hmm
We're in the earliest possible stage of all this.
It's been like
And
5 days, I think. So,
yeah, and I
yeah.
don't think that there's, don't spend a lot of time trying to parse the grammar of the packet that they've put out and read the tea leaves about what it means for the new rules. Um, we've got a long way to go. 2 years is a long time.
hmm
Uh, it isn't, but it is. And anything about this could change in that time. So
hmm
we're all just spectating right now and having an interesting series of what if conversations, really,
hmm
and talking about our hopes and dreams. The one thing that I will mention that we haven't talked about is the idea of the backwards compatibility.
Okay.
What's interesting to me is that the example that they give
hmm
is that you can run Curse of Strahd from the 5e materials in the 1D&D revisions.
hmm
What they don't say is that you can run your 5e wizard or paladin or
hmm
whatever in a table that is using the 1D&D revisions. They don't say you can bring the classes forward. They just say that you could bring an adventure forward.
hmm
So I'm really curious to see what ends up happening with that, whether the 5e classes are in any way compatible or if that stuff is going to go out the window.
I think that there is a whole other video worth of discussion and content on the release of 1D&D and what the company is saying and what they're claiming and implications with that. I think this is actually a pretty good point to stop based just on the Unearthed Arcana article, going over the initial rules, and perhaps next week, dear viewers, this will be a little teaser. We'll go over the larger things going on with the release and the community's response and things of that nature because there is a lot there and there's no way we're fitting it into this video.
All right. So, yeah, I hope that you've enjoyed this first in our ongoing series, apparently, about 1D&D. Uh, so I'm as excited to make the next episode as I hope you are to watch it.
And I'm imagining we might have more news next week potentially. We'll see how much they trickle things out to us or if we get a whole nother torrent of information. But that is at least Natural Two's unscripted reaction or notes on the first little blip that we got from 1D&D.
Disagree with us or tell us how right we are in the comments if you would be so kind. We've had just a couple of commenters so far on the episodes we've put out that I really appreciate. Personal
Mhm.
shout out from me to you for those thoughtful remarks that you left. You know who you are. And like and subscribe. That's my playtest suggestion for
Yeah, if
for
you've
Natural
gotten to the end
2.
of this video, you have a natural 20, so you have to subscribe.
Yeah, every time you get a natural 20 and it doesn't expire on a long rest.
Oh god, we didn't talk about inspiration. Okay, we gotta cut the video off here. But I certainly hope that we tickled your brains and spur more discussion. But that is all for today.